All right, everybody there?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Cool. Live stream should be going. I got to figure out what the permissions are for Chrome that's causing that bits, but that's why you hop on early. All right. I think everything's good to go. I can kick it live whenever you guys are ready.
Yep, all good.
All right. Let's see. Actually, do one of you have the options? Apparently my other one that's live streaming.
I do.
I love watching this attendees number jump from 0 to whatever it jumps to. Hey everyone. As usual, we'll wait till just about 5 minutes past to get started. As usual, if you want to just drop the location you're dialing in from in the chat, that would be awesome. Hey Mukesh, hey Craig, good to see you again. Hey Renato. Hey Ray. And how are you doing today?
I am good.
It's always funny when the first time I'm talking to you during the day is in the waiting room for the webinar. Everyone.
So cool to see people from so many different places.
Yeah.
Garage, how's the smoke situation in New York? Is it better?
The snow?
Smoke.
Oh, the smoke. I was going to say.
I hope you haven't gotten snow.
It is good. I think yesterday it was a little hazy, but today, when I stepped outside this morning to water the plants, everything was solid. Lots of folks from the UK. Yeah. Ken, do you want to just remind everyone how many miles you're running this weekend? Or maybe it was last weekend? I can never keep up.
Last weekend I did a 12-mile run. I have a trip coming up in a couple weeks that is 45 miles over a couple days. So pretty excited. I mean, it's like biggest volume training weeks the next couple weeks, getting ready. So yeah, I think it still hasn't really sunk in yet that I'm going to do that.
What is that in kilometers for everyone that's not on the imperial system? You said 45?
45 miles, so 30 miles is about 50 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
So times 1.5, so like 75-ish, maybe, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice and easy.
A big number.
Wow, we've got a lot of folks through this one. Good topic.
Everybody needs notification.
Right?
somebody was joking with me recently that they were going to use Airflow to just send them notifications for like general, like, things in their life, like reminders and stuff. I was like, oh, that's not a bad idea.
Right. Somebody, I forget who, but someone that we were interviewing, when we gave them like their technical piece of the interview, wrote a DAG that showed like their day, like wake up, do the laundry, like all that. I thought that was really nifty too.
The same person that did the like life of a dog along with it. Tony sent me that one specifically. It's like, I think you'd like this person. Yes, hire them.
Yeah.
Get up, market neighbors.
Right. Speaking of which, we are definitely hiring you folks and who've dialed in. So if you're looking for a more Airflow centric role, please feel free to reach out to us. Cool. So we are 5 minutes in, Ken. I will leave it to you for when you want to get started.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and jump in. Looks like we've got a fair number of people. So I'll just kick it off by saying thanks to everybody for joining. Hope it's nice summery weather or wintry weather, wherever you're calling in from. We're going to be talking today about notifications within Airflow. So really fun topic that I think is relevant to everybody. Just some housekeeping, I guess, before we get started. This will be recorded and available afterwards. So we'll be sending out links with all of the materials that we cover, as well as the recording for the webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. We'll be saving time at the end to go over any Q&A, but Faraj can also hit me with any questions throughout as they come up that are relevant. So throw those in there as we're going along. And we'll go ahead and jump right in. Share, pull this up here. So as I mentioned, notifications in Airflow. So kind of the agenda I want to go through today is start by covering just some notification basics, just on kind of how notifications work within Airflow and what you can do with them. We'll talk about how to set up sort of some really common methods for sending notifications like email and Slack. And then we will go through some more advanced topics. So I'll talk a little bit about SLAs, which are tricky, but can be very useful. And then I think somebody asked in the chat if we're going to cover any particular use cases. This is a pretty general webinar overall in terms of, it should apply to almost all use cases, but we are going to talk a little bit about data quality specifically and notifications for if you have any data quality issues, and a couple of ways that you can implement that within Airflow as sort of an interesting, more specific use case. And then, like I said, we'll leave plenty of time at the end for any questions. But with that, so I'll go ahead and jump right in. Just as a kind of introductory slide to Airflow. We all know probably here that Airflow is a really great orchestrator. You've got your pipelines and code, so it's super flexible. You have a really vast network of provider packages and community contributions, so it's super extensible. You have really sophisticated and flexible infrastructure, so it's highly scalable. And that all sounds great, but what happens if something goes wrong? All of us, I'm sure, would love to think that our code has no bugs, but that obviously isn't realistic. And even if we do have perfect code, sometimes things happen that are outside of our control, right? So an API or external system might go down. You might have some mysterious Kubernetes error that you're never able to replicate. I'm sure you've all been there. So the question is not really if something will go wrong, but rather how do you handle it when something does? And so the first step is obviously knowing that the problem occurred in the first place. So let's start with how do I know if something broke? And probably everybody here knows that the Airflow UI provides a pretty comprehensive view over the status of all of your tasks and your DAGs. But looking at the UI isn't really great for production, right? I certainly won't speak for anybody else, but I definitely don't want to be checking the UI randomly kind of at all points during the day, just in case something happens. So fortunately, Airflow has a ton of options for notifications. It's super flexible. You can notify based on any number of different events. So we'll talk a lot about these throughout the webinar. You can also send notifications via a lot of different methods and to any number of different systems. So again, we'll talk through a lot of this in depth, but I also just want to make sure everybody here is aware that we do have kind of a complimentary guide on this topic that talks through, all of these concepts in detail, as well as provide some instructions on how to set up kind of commonly used notification methods. So if after this you're looking to go implement one of these and you want just some more step-by-step instructions, this can be a great place to get started in addition to the content that we're covering in the webinar. But let's start with some basics, just to give you a sense of kind of how things work in Airflow and what's possible. So the first thing I'll touch on is notification levels. So this essentially means at what level of your pipeline are you setting the notification? So here you can set notifications either at the DAG level. So in that case, they'll be inherited by every task, or you can also set them at the task level if you need more granular control. So if you've used Airflow a lot, you might notice that this particular concept is not unique to notifications specifically. It is, you can do this with many parameters within a DAG. So to set at the DAG level, you'll frequently see things defined in your default args. So the example here would be this email on failure is set to false. But you can also set them at the task level. So in this case, this will email task down at the bottom has email on failure set to true. Any task level configurations are going to take precedence over your DAG level configurations. So combining those can be a good way to get sort of more specific if you have, say, more than the 2 tasks in this example, but maybe you have hundreds of tasks and you want like 3 of them to do something different. It can be good to set things at the DAG level and then override those specifically for something at the task level. So this is just making use of the fact that these arguments, so the email on failure, email on retry, things like that, are a part of the base operator within Airflow, which means you can set them for a specific operator, but then you can also set them for your DAG as well.
I've made that mistake so many times with the precedence. It goes DAG, then task, not the other way around.
Yes. Yep, it'd be easy to get those confused, definitely. Cool. So the next concept is notification triggers. So this is what is happening that is going to cause your notification to be sent. And I cover this here because I think most of us frequently think about notifications in the context of failures, which makes sense because it likely means that we need to step in and fix something. But I want to call out that they can also be set for other triggers as well. Retries and successes being ones that are, again, built into Airflow and really easy to make use of. So essentially within Airflow, you have full control over when you get notified. I think it's also helpful here to mention some of the functionality around retries, which kind of goes along with notifications as part of the failure management system. But just to call out that they are a pretty well built out function. There's a lot you can do with them other than just say, retry this task once or twice, that not everybody is always aware of. At least I wasn't when I started using Airflow. So a couple of things that are nice to pay attention to are the retry delay, which you probably have noticed that you can change, obviously, how long in between your retries you have. There's also something called the retry exponential back off, which if you turn on is going to wait progressively longer periods of time in between each retry. So that can be really nice if you have DAGs that are like hitting APIs or external systems that you know might periodically go down, and that's something that's outside of your control, but you want to give your DAG the best chance of success. So again, just to note that these can be used in conjunction with notifications. Maybe you only want to be notified if something actually fails and you're going to give it a couple of tries before it ever gets to that point. Maybe you also want to know that your DAG failed once and then retried and then made it so that that system went down, but then the next time it was back up. Maybe that's something that you need to know about. All of that you can figure out pretty easily just by configuring these default arguments. So super straightforward there. And so the last of the basic concepts that I want to cover here is custom notifications. So again, built-in notifications, I've talked about like the email on failure, email on retry, things like that are super great for simplicity. They're really easy to implement. But again, one of the great benefits of Airflow is that because everything is Python code, if you can write it in Python, you can do it in Airflow. So the easiest way to define custom notifications within Airflow are using the on failure callback or on success callback functions. Again, these are part of the base operator, so they can be used within any task. And you can define whatever function you want. So in this particular case, we've defined both, and we're just printing some simple statements out. And then you can utilize those within the tasks as needed. We'll show an example in the next section of kind of what this looks like in terms of actually sending notifications to external systems like Slack. This is how we'll implement Slack notifications. But just so that you're aware, again, these are just Python functions, so you can define them to be anything you want. So if you want to say, like, this particular task, I want to run a whole nother function if it fails, or if it succeeds or something, you have full control over that. So with that, I'm going to move on into the next section again and talk about those notification methods. So this is, now that we know kind of what's possible in Airflow, how am I actually going to get that notification to me so that I don't have to go look at the UI or something like that. There are obviously a ton of different ways that you can send notifications in Airflow. Again, because it's Python, you can configure basically anything that has an API you can send a notification to. But here we're just going to cover some of the most common ones. And then, yeah, happy to answer any questions about additional methods as well. But the first and probably most common are going to be email notifications. So I would hazard a guess that anybody who has used Airflow for any length of time has set up email notifications. They are probably, like I said, the most common within most organizations. Again, they're built-in Airflow functionality, which means that all you have to do to use them is configure the SMTP server. So you have to give Airflow a way to send that email. But once you do, Airflow is going to take care of everything else on its own. If you haven't done it before, you can configure SMTP in your Airflow config. There's an SMTP section, as long as you have a server that you can use, which even if you just have like a Gmail account, you can use your Gmail server, but most organizations are going to have an SMTP server that you can use. Or again, you can set up any number of free ones. So you're just going to provide Airflow with all of the information it needs to access that server. You can do this within your config, or you can also set Airflow environment variables. That's how we do it on the Astronomer platform. But once that's done, all you have to do is turn on those notifications like you saw in the examples previously. And then if something fails, like I took a screenshot up here, it's going to send you an email. So these are pretty nice. They're going to give you a link to the logs, print out, what the exception was, so you have a quick sort of insight into what's going on, and don't have to do too much heavy lifting on your part to get to that error. You can also customize your email notifications. So again, the screenshot of that email on the last slide was using the built-in notification functionality, but you again have full control over what's happening. So if you want to change that email subject or the content that's in the email, so maybe you want more information about the DAG and what's happening within it, or less information, or maybe you have some fancy graphics that you want to put in. Anything that you can think of, you can go ahead and do that. You just essentially provide Airflow the path to your Jinja template files. Again, you can do that in your Airflow config or using an environment variable. But maybe your organization uses Slack more than email, so this is probably the other most common notification method. I personally, when I was running Airflow, Career Astronomer used both email and Slack, just so I was sure that it was notified. I found the Slack one's actually a little more useful because I tend to look at Slack more often. It like pops out at me more. Slack notifications are also pretty straightforward to implement. I mentioned before that probably the easiest way of doing this is by defining one of those on failure callback functions. And within it, using the Slack webhook operator. So there is a Slack provider in Airflow. You can check that out on the Astronomer registry and just search for Slack. There's a couple of different hooks and operators, but again, the webhook operator is the one that's typically used. Once you define that within your on failure callback function, you can just define the Slack message you want to send. So again, this is fully configurable by you. The example I have here was originally developed by Caxel on our team. He has a great blog post out there on how to set this up. You will have to set up the webhook piece in your Slack account, but it's pretty straightforward. And again, our guide will link you to Slack documentation on how to do that. Once that's set up, you just set up an Airflow connection, and again, kind of define what you want your error messages to look like, and then you're off and running from there. And now, so at the beginning, I also promised some more kind of advanced notifications, including I mentioned SLAs and data quality checks. I'm mostly going to show these during a demo, but I wanted to first introduce the concept of SLAs and timeouts before I kind of show them within a DAG, because again, they can be a little complex. So these are other built-in Airflow functions that are used to give you even more control over what's happening in your DAGs. They're, in my experience, not used as commonly, and they're not as well known. But they can be super helpful. A lot of times I've talked to folks that are like, I have this use case and I just need to know like if my task is taking too long, or I want to kill a task if it's taking too long, and they have no idea that there's functionality within Airflow that you can use to make that happen. So again, kind of lesser known, but very useful. So SLAs are used to notify you if your tasks are taking longer than expected to complete. So you set what that period of time is, and if your task or the DAG as a whole misses that time, you're going to be notified. Again, I'll make the distinction between SLAs are just a notification mechanism. Nothing is going to happen within the DAG. If it does miss that SLA that you've defined, it's just going to send you an email, or we'll look at what that looks like in a minute. Timeouts, on the other hand, are going to actually fail the task if it takes longer than the allotted period of time. So those can be really useful to implement if you have, things that might hang for some reason, or if some sort of external system isn't available, and that your DAG is just going to wait for forever and it's holding up other important things, and you don't want that to happen. Timeouts can be a useful way of kind of intervening automatically without you having to do anything. Again, I'll show an example of SLAs in a minute, but other things about them that I just want to point out that are not maybe quite so intuitive, or that people don't always realize right away, is that they are relative to the DAG execution date, not the task start time. So something to keep in mind when you actually are choosing the SLA and implementing it. Sometimes when I was playing around with them, had a couple of DAGs that I implemented SLAs on, and then knew they were going to miss, and then they didn't. Like, wait a minute, why haven't they missed? And again, it's because they're not relative to the start time of the task, but the start time of the DAG. So just something to keep in mind there. Also note that they're only evaluated on scheduled DAG runs. So this is another mistake that I made when I first went, oh, this is a great new feature, I want to try it out. Went and implemented an SLA in my DAG and hit trigger, nothing happened. And again, that's because triggered DAGs are not going to have their SLAs evaluated. So again, just note, if you're implementing and trying to figure out whether it's going to work, you have to actually wait for the scheduled DAG run in order to see that. So from there, again, as promised, I will kind of move on over into a demo to show some of these things. So I'm going to flip over to my Airflow UI here. I just have an instance of Airflow running locally using the Astronomer CLI. Before I dive into the more interesting use cases, I just want to point out in this example DAG, again, since I showed some of this in the code snippets in the slides, but I know it can be a little weird to look at code in that. case, but again, just want to highlight for anybody who's kind of newer to Airflow that, again, these params in the default args, all you have to do is set them to true or false, kind of whatever you want here. This is an example where I've set some at the DAG level. So I've turned on email on failure, but then I've said, okay, I actually don't want that to happen for my dummy operators. I'm not really sure how a dummy operator could fail, but if it did, I don't want to know about it. So I've turned those off here. So again, that's just a kind of quick example of how you can set those up super easily with the Airflow built-in notifications. The next example I wanted to talk about again is those SLAs. So kind of diving into those a little bit deeper. So I have this SLA DAG here. And to show you kind of what's going on here, I have a Python function here that is set to sleep for 40 seconds. So that's all it does. Then in my default arg, so at the DAG level, I have set my SLA for 30 seconds. So because my task takes 40, this DAG should miss its SLA every time it runs. I am running it every 5 minutes so that it's scheduled and we can see something. And I believe it should be running, yeah, so it has been running a few times today. One of the easy ways to see missed SLAs is in the Airflow UI. So if I go to Browse, and then there's this tab called SLA Misses. This is going to show you, again, all of your tasks that missed their SLAs. So you can see I've got a whole bunch of them for today since this has been running every 5 minutes. This SLA task is the one that is sleeping for 40 seconds. Notice here you also see this end task showing up a bunch. So if I go back to my DAG and look at the graph view, you can see this DAG has a couple of dummy operators kind of bookending this Python function that's sleeping for 40 seconds. The reason this end task is also missing its SLA, even though that end task is essentially instantaneous, it takes like less than a second to run, is because, again, that SLA that I've set at the DAG level is based on the DAG execution date, not the task start time. So this end task did not take more than 30 seconds, which is my SLA. But because I've said the SLA for my entire DAG is 30 seconds, and this task took 40 seconds, it also caused this one to miss based on, again, that DAG start date. So that can also be sort of effectively a way of setting the SLA for your entire DAG time. If you set it at the DAG level, whichever task initially causes you to go over that time, and then any subsequent tasks are also going to miss. So again, a little bit confusing, but in the end, it does give you a lot of flexibility. The other thing I'll come back and note is that, again, you can also set SLAs at the task level. So same thing as other notifications. This can be used if you want to implement different SLAs for different tasks. So I have them commented out here, but you can see I've set different amounts of time for each one. So that's one way of implementing there. The other thing I'll note is that, so again, you can always come to the Airflow UI to see any SLA misses. However, that's not the most effective notification mechanism. So with SLAs, as long as you have an email defined, so I have one here, you are also going to get an email every time your SLA is missed. There is no way to turn this functionality off. So if you have emails set, if you have an email specified here because you're using it for like email on failures, there's no way to say I want email on failures, but not for my SLAs. So again, just note that. If you have a DAG like this that runs every 5 minutes and misses its SLA every time, you're going to get a lot of emails. So just a note there, but lots of options with that. Cool. So again, I mentioned at the start, the other kind kind of maybe more interesting actual use case that I wanted to talk about along with notifications is a data quality use case. So this is not different so much in the notification methods as it is to say that maybe I want to be notified not only if something wrong happened, something went wrong in my DAG, so an API was down or there was a bug in my code, so something failed. But I have a DAG that's processing some data and I want to know if something is wrong with that data. And this can be a really useful way of kind of getting the most out of Airflow notifications, because again, there's a lot that you can do in terms of how you're going to be notified and when you're going to be notified within Airflow. But I need to then build kind of some tasks into my DAG that are going to do that for me. So that's what this example is doing here, and I'll kind of walk through it. I'll note kind of up front that there are many, many ways that you can do, data quality checks within your DAG. And on top of that, many ways that you could notify based on those checks. So this is just one particular method that can be used kind of in a simpler use case to get started. But you have a ton of flexibility here. So what this DAG is doing is taking data from S3 and putting it into Redshift. So pretty straightforward, pretty common use case, especially if you're taking data from some other system. Putting it in S3 first can give you, is a good sort of stepping stone, both to make use of existing Airflow operators and also to implement data quality checks. So the tasks in this DAG that are actually doing that, you can see are this upload to S3 and this load to Redshift. So that's kind of my basic actually moving data tasks. The rest of this is implementing data quality checks at different points along the way. So I'll walk through what these tasks actually look like. But essentially I'm implementing validation at every step. So this validate etag is going to check the data in S3 based on a hash. So I'm checking it once it lands there from wherever source system I'm taking it. This validate Redshift is going to check and make sure that it was actually loaded properly into the table. So my data showed up there in the way it was supposed to. And then row level quality checks here are going to implement additional checks based on, I'm saying, I think the data is actually supposed to look like this, and it's going to do that based on some set of criteria that I provide. So if we look at the code for this, again, I'll just kind of walk through the checks that are happening here. Using a couple of different operators that are useful and also, at least in my opinion, maybe less well known, or at least to me and other folks that I've talked to. So simple Python tasks, again, just to upload to S3. Again, my validate etag is going to make use of the S3 hook, and then it's going to check the MD5 hash of the file that is uploaded. So again, just checking that file that landed in S3 based on what I know the file should look like. So that's a pretty common, if you're moving files around, to check the hashes to kind of validate whether data is in the right place. Can also be used, I've used it in the past to validate whether data has been processed already or not. So it can be a way of doing incremental loads or something like that. And it's pretty easy to implement. You can see here, so just a couple of lines. I'll go ahead and skip over my operators that are actually doing the transfer. So S3 to Redshift, again, just making use of that AWS provider package. So super nice. I don't have to do a lot of code here. And then we get into the actual validation tasks. So these are going to use what's called the SQL check operator, which again was new to me as of relatively recently. It's kind of a super, super useful one that I think goes under the radar a lot of times, but essentially it allows you to run a query against any sort of database and pass or fail that task based on the results of that query. So I'm passing in SQL that I'm storing in files external to my DAG. So kind of going on best practices there. And this first check, again, is just going to make sure that the data has actually landed in the table as we expected. And then down here in this task group, we're also using the SQL check operator, but again, this time we're actually checking the content of the rows of data. So again, what this is doing is it's going to loop through a JSON that I provide that says, here are all of the checks that I want to run. So again, this will be a dynamic. If I want to add another one that says I want this particular row to look like this, I can do that without a lot of effort. And then I'm doing a SQL check operator for each one. Just to look at kind of the supporting files for this project, over to, this is the code that I'm running for in my local Airflow instance here. So again, here's my data quality DAG that we were just looking at. You can see in my include directory, so this is an Astronomer Airflow project structure. So I have include for all of my supporting files. I have the SQL folder, and here is my row quality check. So again, this is all parameterized so that I can just add checks as needed, but this is what the check operator is going to use to actually run that check, and it's essentially either going to return something, which is what it should if the data matches, or if the data doesn't match, it's not going to return anything and it's going to fail the task. So what that looks like in terms of the actual JSON is, again, have structured this so that I'm checking a couple of different rows, for this data. So I'm putting this in here. If I wanted to check another row in my data set that I knew wanted to be there, I could add another one. And again, my tasks will be generated dynamically. So pretty simple infrastructure. And then if I look at this DAG again, you can get the sense of, at this point, this run was successful. So everything went as predicted. But if it doesn't, if it fails at any one of these steps, any downstream tasks are going to be stopped. So that's going to keep me from doing something I don't want to do with erroneous data. But it's also going to allow me to make use of those notifications. So just to look at some historical runs here, you can see I have lots where there were failures at different points along the way. Within any of these, I can set up any of these tasks either at the DAG level for all of them, or I can get more specific based on each check if I want it to email me or send a Slack notification or retry 60 different times or something like that. So in this particular example, I think I've only turned the email on failure on, but again, based on everything else we've already talked about, I have total flexibility there over how to implement this. Again, this is kind of just one example. We've seen lots of success with DAGs like this, as well as DAGs using like Great Expectations provider for data quality checks, things like that. So lots of different methods that you can implement depending on what your data looks like, where it lives, and how many checks you're running. But this is just to say that Airflow is, a really great, really flexible tool for obviously data orchestration, but this is a really important part of that because you need to know not just is there something wrong with your code, but part of, managing errors for data pipelines in general, and part of why it's tricky is that you have your data as well. So that's a whole nother moving piece that you need to manage. And this can be one way of, implementing that so that you can ensure that everything's kind of running smoothly, and that if it's not, and you can go ahead and, step in and make changes as needed. So I'll go ahead and pause there. Raj, if there are any questions, I just went through a lot of stuff pretty fast.
Yeah, there are a ton of questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that this has been an incredible demo. I didn't know about that operator either, and it just feels like it could save so much time so quickly. Just I want to share this comment from Anthony in the chat. It's been rare to end a webinar that had so much content that truly mattered to my work so much. That's a heck of a compliment. Thanks, Anthony.
That's really great to hear. And I think I said at the beginning, like, this is an exciting topic for me because it's relevant to everybody. Everybody has errors and has to manage notifications. And so, yeah, we're super glad that we're able to help.
Cool. All right. So we got a bunch of questions here, some easy ones, some hard ones. We'll just start getting them to you. So for somebody on LinkedIn stream who's asking, because I answered in the chat on Zoom, but that doesn't go to LinkedIn, does Airflow support MS Team notifications?
Sorry, what notifications?
Microsoft Teams.
Oh, I believe so. Was that your answer? I think.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. You can either do it, I don't know if there's a provider for it, but you can definitely just write a Python function that does it.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, there's not a provider currently, although somebody should definitely make one because I'm sure that would be common. But as long as team, I will say, like, anything that has an API, you can send a notification to. So you might have to write the function yourself, although probably somebody out there in the community has already done it. But yeah, not much limitation in that sense.
Cool. Looks like somebody in the chat has it in their processes as well. So triple confirmation there.
Nice.
Yeah. Can SLA messages be sent to Slack as well?
Ooh, that's a good question. So there's no built-in mechanism to do that, just like there isn't a built-in like error mechanism. But I think I'm trying to think about how you would do that actually. I think the answer is probably yes, even if you had to sort of customize like what's going on in the back end, because it should be as simple as, you know, sending, defining that like on failure callback function that sends your Slack message. I'm not sure that you can implement that within the SLA because the SLA is like a different functionality than like your task failing. But you could always customize it, right? To go in and say like wherever in the Airflow code, the SLA is actually sending like the email notifications, you could just add something that also sent them to Slack.
Yeah. I think I know the answer to this one too. But I think either way, it's a great feature request if I'm right. But can I send SLA for a task group? I don't know if you can today.
Say no.
Yeah.
I want to say no, but that would be a good feature request.
Yeah, Bruno. Feel free to follow up with us about that. I think we can definitely get that added to the next release of Airflow. I think we have some work to do to clean up how SLAs and Airflow work generally, right? I know Kenton's talked about that with a few folks on the team, and that would definitely be a great feature to add. Question from Pierre. Can we receive SLA alerts if a DAG is still running but taking longer than expected and not when a specific task is finished? So we don't have to kill the running task with a timeout?
Yes. So if you set your SLA at the DAG level, that is effectively going to do that because every task is going to be evaluated against that. And SLAs are never going to change the status of your task. Only timeouts will do that, and they're totally separate functionality. So I think in that case, I would just recommend implementing the SLA at the DAG level. You could also potentially implement it just for the last task in your DAG. Would be another way if you didn't want to, like, you didn't want the misses for any middle task or something like that.
Yeah, I think that having it that last task would probably be what I've seen other people do as well. Another question from Sarah Tynes. Can you set different email recipients for different notification types? E.g., user 1 gets a failure email and user 2 gets a success email.
That's an interesting question. I think you can. I mean, I know you could set different, email threads like for each task. Like if you were implementing at the task level, then you can do that. If you're just implementing at the DAG level and you want like different success emails, you might have to change kind of what is happening on that in like the email notification code and like what parameter it's using, because I think that by default they all just use this email array. But again, like I kind of showed in the slides, and our guide links to the actual code that you can change when you if you wanted to overwrite like what gets sent in that email. But that's again all code that you can point to, like you could just change it. So it may require some customization there to accomplish that.
Yeah. And then like somebody in the chat pointed out, you can get kind of nifty with listservs if that's something that you need to do.
Yeah.
That's also a good solution. Any scalability advice or practices, i.e. you have thousands of DAGs going, right? What's the max notifications per DAG, or how do you kind of think about the signal to noise ratio as you're going through it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that's kind of, in your DAG design and how you customize your notifications and what you do with them. I would say like, I typically think about notifications as like, what do I need to be notified about versus like, what can I just go find myself if I want to look at something? So starting there, and then, I mean, if you have thousands of DAGs and you truly need to be notified about any failure, then I can say you should turn on notifications there. One thing, I don't know that there are any like scalability, like performance related issues from sending a lot of notifications, because in the end, again, these are just like simple, either you're hitting an API like with Slack to send the notification, or you're sending an email. So that should be fine. I think I would recommend if it's just like if the volume is a lot, like with Slack, I've seen people, create lots of different Slack channels that are used for like different DAGs or different sets of DAGs or different types of errors, things like that. You can get pretty crafty with kind of how you design your notifications so that you can kind of sift through it if you have like a really high volume.
I just feel like it's such a hard thing, right? You want a notification on all of your DAGs, but as you have a ton of DAGs and that gets piled up, it's almost like there's no right answer there.
Yeah.
Cool. So what notification monitoring tool would you suggest if a human review task is part of the pipeline and we'd like to notify if the human review isn't complete after X amount of days? That's a tough one. I don't know if I'm not very familiar on notification tools, Kenton. Do you have are you familiar with kind of how that space works?
No. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the notification tools, I think, to make a recommendation on which one would be best. I guess I would say if I mean, that almost might be sort of in the DAG design as well, as opposed to like what system you're sending the notification to, because if you're saying this human intervention needs to happen and like it hasn't happened yet, I don't know what the use case is, but that could be something where sensors might be helpful that are like going to wait for something to happen, and you can say like, okay, if it doesn't happen, then send me a notification wherever that's going to be. I didn't cover it in this example, but there's also like a SQL sensor that I've seen used in similar ways to the SQL check operator that again is just going to wait for data to hit. And so you can, you could do things like set an SLA or a timeout like on that sensor, or configure your sensor to notify you if some amount of time has gone on. Again, it depends on kind of like what that human intervention is, but that's just top of my head, something that might be worth looking into.
And looks like the last one, oh, sorry, two. Someone from LinkedIn earlier asked, what is a task group? That's probably a good one to get into.
Yeah. So task groups are a new function with Airflow 2. They are a UI concept as a way of grouping tasks. So when you define it in your code, it just looks like this. So they're oftentimes used in cases like this where you're defining a dynamic set of tasks, but they don't have to be. So I set my task group here and then define tasks within it. What that does is in my graph view, you can see this blue task here is my task group. So it gives me a view where I can essentially collapse everything in it so that I'm only viewing one thing for the group. And then I can click to expand sort of what to see all of the tasks that are in that. This is obviously a really simple example. There's only 2 in here, but you can imagine if you have like hundreds of tasks, it can be a really helpful way of organizing everything within your DAG. So again, it doesn't affect the behavior of your DAG or tasks at all. It's just a kind of organizational UI concept. It can be a really good way of getting around sub-DAGs if you were using sub-DAGs as an organizational thing. That's part of why they were created, to give an alternative that doesn't have the sort of performance issues of sub-DAGs.
Yeah, I love task groups. They make things so much cleaner. All right, yeah. Last question here from Pierre. Can we group alerts together to avoid being flooded 50 tasks from the same DAG if 50 tasks from the same DAG are failing at the same time?
I believe the answer is yes, and I'm unsure. I want to say that because I think I've done it before, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head how we implemented that.
Yeah.
I want to follow up unless you know the answer for.
I was going to say no. I think I'm drawing the same blank as you are. Yeah, Pierre, please follow up with us.
Yeah.
I'm going to drop my email in the chat. I'll drop Kenton's as well. Yeah.
I would say that if for some reason, if I'm totally making that up and it's not possible, then that should also be a feature request, because I think that's a very common
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Kenton, thank you so much for going through this. Love the example and love the content. And thank you everyone else for coming to hang out with us on this Thursday afternoon. If there was anything that you wanted to ask we didn't cover, please feel free to shoot us a note, and we'd love to chat with you about it. But yeah, until then, we will see you at the next webinar. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.